Megan Foster's hands trembled as she adjusted the thin strap of her pale blue dress. The gymnasium ahead pulsed with loud music, lights swirling like a carnival over the crowd of teenagers packed inside. The smell of cheap perfume, sweat, and punch wafted through the open doors. She paused at the edge of the parking lot, her heels sinking slightly into the asphalt, questioning, for the 100th time, why she had come. The answer was simple. She had promised herself this year would be different. She would stop hiding. She would stop running away. With her chin lifted, she stepped forward, her dress brushing against her calves as the breeze picked up. The gym entrance loomed larger with every step. Shadows moved across the glass doors as kids laughed, danced, and posed for photos. Megan's chest tightened. She had been invisible for so long, they wouldn't even notice her. Except someone did. Claire Harrington, the queen of Crestwood High, stood near the door, a smile painted on her perfect face like a mask of cruelty. Her eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto Megan the instant she crossed the threshold. Claire tilted her head slightly, her golden curls glinting under the fluorescent lights as her entourage huddled around her, whispering. Megan's stomach dropped. "Stay calm," Megan muttered under her breath, shoving her hands into the pockets of her cardigan for reassurance. She could survive this. Inside, the gym was a whirlwind of sound and movement. Streamers and balloons hung in limp, half-hearted attempts at decoration. The DJ blasted music that reverberated off the walls, turning conversations into muffled noise. Colored lights flickered across the crowd, illuminating a sea of sequined dresses and rented tuxedos. Megan pressed herself against the wall, avoiding the dance floor. She scanned the room for a familiar face but found none. It was only a matter of time before. "Where do you think you're going, Cinderella?" The voice, honey-sweet and venomous, sent chills down Megan's spine. She turned to find Claire blocking her path, flanked by her usual posse, Jessica, Lila, and Brooke. The gym lights played tricks on their expressions, but the malice was unmistakable. "I don't want any trouble, Claire," Megan said quietly, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her throat. "Trouble?" Claire gasped, placing a hand over her chest in mock offense. "Oh, please, Megan. I'm just here to make sure you have a good time. Isn't that right, girls?" The chorus of giggles that followed felt like needles on Megan's skin. She took a step back, her heart pounding. Claire matched it, her heels clicking ominously on the gym floor. "You've been hiding all year," Claire continued, her smile never wavering. "Why so shy, huh? What's the matter? Not used to the spotlight? Leave me alone, Claire." Megan's voice broke as she turned to walk away. But before she could make it far, two hands grabbed her by the arms, yanking her backward into the dimly lit corridor just outside the gym. Jessica and Brooke were on either side of her, holding her in place while Claire and Lila followed behind, laughter echoing through the narrow space. Panic flared in Megan's chest as she struggled against their grip. "Stop it! Let me go!" Claire stepped in front of her, tilting her head as if considering something. Then, with a snap of her fingers, Lila appeared at her side, holding a bright red cup of punch. "Don't worry, Megan," Claire said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "This won't take long." Before Megan could react, the freezing liquid splashed across her chest, soaking through her dress and cardigan in an instant. She gasped as the sticky sweetness of the punch clung to her skin, the icy sensation quickly replaced by shame. The cup hit the floor, shattering, its sound louder than the music inside. Claire stepped back, her laughter ringing out like a death knell as Megan dropped to her knees, her trembling hands pressing against the cold tile. Tears burned at the edges of her vision as the laughter grew louder, filling her ears and her mind. Claire's shoes clicked away, the sound fading with the group's taunts as they retreated into the gym. "Did you see her face? God, that was priceless. I bet she'll never come back to school again." The voices blended into a haze as Megan sat frozen, punch pooling around her. Her cardigan stuck to her shoulders, the chill seeping into her bones. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. Her breathing came fast and shallow, every humiliating second replaying like a broken record. Then, suddenly, the gym doors burst open. The laughter silenced in an instant. A collective hush swept through the corridor as someone entered, someone who didn't belong. Tyler Scott. Megan blinked up through tear-clouded eyes as the figure walked toward her. Tyler's black jacket stood out sharply against his white shirt, his hands tucked into his pockets as he moved with calm, deliberate steps. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely out of place. His presence alone carried a weight that silenced the entire hallway. He stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes sweeping the scene before locking onto Claire, who froze mid-smirk. "This is what passes for fun here." Tyler's voice was low, dangerous. Claire's smile faltered, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "What's it to you, Scott? Shouldn't you be terrorizing your school?" Tyler ignored her, his gaze returning to Megan. Her cheeks flushed hot as she scrambled to wipe at her wet dress, but the damage was done. He stepped closer, his expression softening as he extended a hand. "Come on," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. Megan stared at him, stunned. "What? You don't belong here. Not like this." Hesitant, her hand shook as she reached for his. His grip was firm but gentle, and he pulled her to her feet with ease. Megan's cardigan clung to her, heavy and dripping, but she hardly noticed. Tyler turned his back on Claire and her friends without a second glance. "Tyler, this doesn't concern you," Claire snapped, her voice rising in frustration. He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "It does now." Tyler led Megan back toward the gym doors, but instead of stopping, he guided her through them. The room fell silent as they entered together. Conversation stilled, music faded into the background, and dozens of eyes turned toward them. "Why are we?" Megan began, but Tyler leaned close, his words a quiet murmur only she could hear. "Let them look. Let them remember this moment." Her chest tightened as Tyler walked her to the center of the gym floor, where the DJ hesitated, glancing uncertainly between them and his equipment. Tyler raised a hand, signaling for him to keep playing. The beat resumed, slowly at first, then growing louder, shaking the walls. Tyler turned to Megan, his expression softening. "Trust me." Megan hesitated, then nodded. He smiled faintly, pulling her gently into a dance. His movements were steady, unhurried, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around them. Megan's heart pounded in her chest, but not from fear. The gym lights glinted off her soaked dress, making it shimmer. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her, but for the first time, she didn't feel small. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the music. Tyler's gaze held hers, steady and sure. "Because tonight, you deserve to shine." As the music swelled, Megan lifted her head, shoulders squaring. Tyler spun her once, the soaked fabric catching the light, and for a single perfect moment, the laughter and whispers disappeared. Megan Foster didn't want to check her phone that morning, but the persistent vibration beside her bed was impossible to ignore. The light of dawn barely filtered through her curtains as she groaned, turning over to grab the device. 10 new notifications. Her stomach sank. A deep breath later, she swiped open the screen, only to freeze. The first post on her feed was a picture of her and Tyler Scott in the center of the gymnasium, surrounded by flashing lights and curious stares. The caption read, "Cinderella and her hero." "Oh, pathetic." Megan scrolled, each post worse than the last. Someone had taken a close-up of her soaked dress, punch stains dark against the fabric. Another showed her stumbling in the corridor. Video clips appeared too, most capturing Claire Harrington's cruel laughter. But the ones that made her hands shake were the memes. Photos of her humiliated face, edited with captions like, "Crestwood's new mascot," "Punch Girl," and "The wet rat has entered the chat." She threw the phone onto the bed, the sting of tears threatening to blur her vision. From the hallway, her mom called. "Megan, you're going to be late." "Coming," she croaked, voice barely functioning. She buried her face in her hands, letting herself cry for just a minute longer. Then, wiping her cheeks, she got up. Whatever happened last night was now on display for everyone to see, but Megan refused to give Claire and her friends the satisfaction of breaking her. She dressed quickly, slipping into her favorite hoodie and jeans, the same clothes she wore when she wanted to disappear. Outside, the chill of the morning air hit her as she walked toward the bus stop. Kids from her school gathered in small clusters, their eyes darting toward her as whispers stirred the air like a cold breeze. Megan kept her head down, clutching her backpack straps tightly. The bus arrived, and she climbed on, slipping into a seat near the back. She stared out the window, ignoring the occasional giggles and pointed fingers from the rows ahead. Then she heard it, a single voice. "Hey." Megan blinked, looking up. Tyler Scott stood in the aisle, one hand gripping the seat for balance. He didn't wait for an invitation. He dropped into the spot next to her. "What are you doing here?" Megan hissed, her cheeks already burning. Tyler shrugged, as if his being there made perfect sense. "Rode the wrong bus, I guess. Liar." He grinned faintly, leaning back against the seat. His black hoodie matched his dark hair, and his confident posture stood in stark contrast to the stares they were both getting. Megan could feel the weight of everyone watching, the whispers multiplying. "This isn't helping," she muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "Sure it is," Tyler said, unfazed. "Now they're looking at me instead of you." Megan stared at him, baffled by his calm. "You don't care, do you? About them?" Tyler's gaze flicked over the crowd of students ahead. "Nope." Her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't know whether to be annoyed or grateful, but Tyler's nonchalance had an oddly grounding effect. She took a breath and forced herself to look straight ahead, ignoring everyone else. When the bus pulled up to Crestwood High, Megan made a quick escape, hurrying toward the entrance. Tyler followed close behind, his casual stroll in sharp contrast to her brisk steps. "Why are you following me?" she snapped, stopping in her tracks just before the front doors. Tyler raised an eyebrow, hands stuffed in his pockets. "We're both heading inside, aren't we? You're not even a student here." Minor detail. Before she could argue, a familiar voice rang out behind them. "Well, look who's attached at the hip now." Megan turned to see Claire and her entourage strutting up the walkway, their designer coats and smug expressions a perfect shield against the cold. Claire's eyes flicked between Megan and Tyler, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Didn't think you'd show your face here again, Foster," Claire said, feigning surprise. "Brave of you." "Or stupid," Jessica added, earning a round of giggles. Megan braced herself for the insult, but before she could open her mouth, Tyler stepped forward. "You know," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "it's sad when a group of people can't find anything better to do than obsess over one person. You should try getting hobbies." The laughter died instantly. Claire's smile stiffened, her cheeks tinged red with embarrassment. "Why don't you mind your own business, Scott?" she spat. "Gladly," Tyler replied, stepping aside to gesture Megan toward the doors. "Ladies first." Megan hesitated, her heart pounding, but Claire's scowl gave her a strange flicker of satisfaction. Lifting her chin, she marched past them, Tyler following close behind. Once inside, Megan exhaled sharply. "You didn't have to do that." "Sure I did." Watching her face turn red was worth it. She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the tiny smile that crept onto her lips. The rest of the day was a blur of sideways glances, hushed whispers, and the occasional glare from Claire's minions. Megan forced herself to focus on her classes, though the knot in her stomach never fully loosened. She spent lunch in the library, hiding between the tall shelves with a book she didn't actually read. When the final bell rang, she hurried toward the school exit, determined to make it home without running into anyone. But as she pushed through the front doors, she froze. Tyler was there, leaning casually against the bike rack. "What are you doing?" she asked, exasperated. "Waiting for you. I don't need an escort." Tyler shrugged. "Good, because I'm walking this way anyway." "You don't even go here." "Not today," he said with a smirk. Megan sighed, too tired to argue. They walked side by side in silence, the afternoon sun dipping low behind the trees. When they reached the end of the street, Megan finally stopped, turning to face him. "Why are you doing all this?" Tyler's easygoing expression faltered for just a second, replaced by something more serious. "Because someone needs to. And because I can." "That's not an answer," she shot back. Tyler's gaze softened. "You shouldn't have to deal with this alone." Megan looked down, her hands curling into fists at her sides. The humiliation from the previous night still stung, and now Tyler was caught in the crossfire because of her. "They're going to make you a target, too," she said quietly. Tyler tilted his head, a faint smile returning to his lips. "Let them try." Before Megan could respond, the screech of tires rang out from behind them. She turned just in time to see a black car pull up, its tinted windows rolling down. Inside, a familiar face smirked from the passenger seat. Jake Henderson, Claire's boyfriend and one of the school's top athletes. "Well, well," Jake sneered. "Look who it is. Scott, you really think you can show up here and play hero?" "Keep driving, Jake," Tyler said, his voice steady but sharp. Jake laughed, but his eyes narrowed. "You've got a big mouth for someone out of his league." The car door opened, and Jake stepped out, flanked by two other guys from the football team. Megan's pulse quickened. Tyler moved in front of her, his stance unshakable. "This doesn't need to get ugly," Tyler said. Jake cracked his knuckles, grinning. "Too late for that." The first punch flew. Megan screamed Tyler's name, but he was already moving, ducking under Jake's swing and landing a solid hit to his ribs. The other two boys jumped in, fists and elbows flying. Tyler fought back fiercely, his movements controlled but desperate against the 3-on-1 assault. "Stop it!" Megan yelled, tears streaming down her face as Jake shoved Tyler hard against the pavement. Bruised and bleeding, Tyler pushed himself up, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked over his shoulder at Megan, his dark eyes still blazing with determination. "Go home, Megan," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "No," she screamed. Tyler turned back toward Jake, his fists clenching. "If you want to fight, fine. But you don't touch her. Ever." The scene blurred for Megan as the shouts and sounds of fists meeting skin echoed through the empty street. And all she could think, frozen in place, was that this was all her fault. Tyler winced as Megan dabbed a wet cloth over the gash on his cheek. They were sitting on the porch of her small weathered house, the warm glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. The fight had ended hours ago, leaving Tyler bruised, bloody, but strangely defiant. Megan had insisted on helping him clean up after dragging him inside and ignoring his protests. "You shouldn't have done that," Megan murmured, her voice low and trembling. Tyler glanced at her from under his bruised brow. "They were asking for it." "They weren't asking for you to get hurt," she shot back, pressing the cloth a little harder than necessary. Tyler hissed but didn't pull away. Megan's hands were steady as she worked, but her thoughts were in chaos. The image of Tyler standing alone, facing down Jake and his goons, wouldn't leave her mind. His calm determination as fists flew, his refusal to back down, it both terrified and unsettled her. "You're reckless," she said, more to herself than him. Tyler tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Reckless? Maybe. But I'm not going to let them walk all over me, or you." Megan dropped the cloth into the bowl of water, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't your fight, Tyler." "It is now." Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of insects and distant sounds of a lawnmower 2 streets over. Megan clenched her fists on her lap, trying to make sense of everything. "Why do you care so much?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler leaned back, resting his sore head against the wooden railing. His dark eyes scanned the horizon as if searching for the answer in the sky. "Because I know what it's like to stand alone," he said quietly. "And I know what it's like to need someone to have your back." Megan swallowed hard, her heart twisting at the sincerity in his words. Tyler always seemed untouchable, confident, unshakable, but there was something about the way he spoke now that made him seem human. Before she could respond, a black SUV pulled up in front of the house, its engine rumbling like a distant storm. Megan stiffened as the car door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, with graying hair slicked back and a suit that looked too expensive for their neighborhood. "Who's that?" Megan whispered, dread creeping into her voice. Tyler's jaw tightened. "My father." Megan blinked, her head snapping toward Tyler. "Your father." The man strode toward them with purpose, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp gaze flicked between Megan and his battered son. Tyler sat up straighter, shoulders squared, as if preparing for a different kind of fight. "Tyler." The man's voice was calm, authoritative. "I've been looking for you." "I've been busy," Tyler replied coolly, not bothering to hide his defiance. The man's gaze lingered on Tyler's bruised face before shifting to Megan, making her feel small under his scrutiny. "And you must be Megan Foster." Megan hesitated before nodding. Yes. Hi." He didn't return the greeting. Instead, he turned back to Tyler. "I received a call today. Something about my son getting into a fight. Again." Tyler smirked, though the effort clearly caused him pain. "I didn't start it." "That doesn't matter, does it?" his father shot back sharply. "What matters is how this looks. People talk, Tyler. About you. About us." Tyler's hands curled into fists. "Maybe if you cared about me instead of your image, we wouldn't have this problem." The tension was suffocating. Megan watched the exchange in silence, her heart pounding as Tyler's father turned icy eyes on her once more. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here," he said, his voice low and cutting. "But I'll be clear, you stay away from my son. He doesn't need distractions." Megan's cheeks flushed red, anger bubbling beneath her skin. "I'm not a distraction." "Really?" The man raised an eyebrow, his condescension like a slap. "Then tell me, Miss Foster, what exactly do you contribute to Tyler's life? What can you offer him? Because from where I'm standing, all I see is someone who's dragging him down." Megan flinched, his words landing like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Tyler was on his feet, his voice ringing out sharp and clear. "That's enough." His father's gaze snapped back to him. "Tyler." "I said, that's enough," Tyler shouted, his face a mix of anger and pain. "I'm not a trophy. I'm not one of your deals you can negotiate. And Megan, she's not the problem here. You are." For a moment, no one moved. The air crackled with tension as Tyler and his father stared each other down. Finally, the older man straightened his suit jacket, his face a mask of cold indifference. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving the gravel to crunch beneath his shoes. The SUV door slammed shut, and within seconds, the vehicle was gone, its engine fading into the distance. Megan let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. What just happened? Tyler sat back down heavily, rubbing his bruised knuckles. "That's my dad for you. Always looking out for his reputation." Megan hesitated before sitting beside him again. "He's wrong, you know. About me. About us." Tyler glanced at her, something soft in his expression despite the exhaustion on his face. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the encounter still lingering. Megan looked down at her lap, her voice quiet when she spoke. "Maybe he's right about one thing, though. You're getting hurt because of me." Tyler turned toward her sharply. "Stop that." "It's true," she pressed, her voice breaking. "Claire, Jake. All of it started because you stood up for me. You don't deserve to go through this." Tyler reached out, his fingers lightly brushing against hers. The gesture startled her into looking up. "Megan," he said firmly, his gaze unwavering, "this isn't your fault. I made my choices. I'm here because I want to be." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding silently. Tyler leaned back again, wincing as he moved, but his voice softened. "You're not dragging me down, Megan. You're the reason I'm still standing." Her heart twisted at his words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe it. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, Megan and Tyler sat together on the worn porch steps, the silence between them comfortable and safe. For all the chaos surrounding them, there was something solid and unspoken in that moment. But as the darkness crept in, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The wind howled through the narrow alley as Megan Foster pulled her jacket tighter around herself. The dim streetlights barely reached the edges of the old brick buildings, leaving shadows to stretch like claws on the cold pavement. She glanced over her shoulder, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, to leave this place and never look back. But Claire's message had been clear. Meet us after school, alone. We need to talk. No tricks. Megan knew better. Deep down, she knew nothing good ever came from following Claire Harrington's orders, but her desperation to put an end to the torment pushed her forward. If Claire wanted a truce, or at least a ceasefire, Megan was willing to hear her out. Anything to stop the glares in the hallways, the whispers, and the texts she could no longer bear to open. Her steps echoed against the cracked pavement, each one heavier than the last. She had barely reached the center of the alley when she heard them, the distinct click of heels against concrete. Claire appeared first, stepping out from the shadows like a ghost from a nightmare, her flawless face illuminated by the faint yellow glow of a street lamp. "Right on time," Claire said, her voice sweet but laced with malice. She crossed her arms, her leather jacket creaking with emotion. From behind her emerged the rest of her entourage, Jessica, Lila, and Brooke. Their silhouettes were sharp against the darkness, predatory as they fanned out to surround her. Megan's heart pounded in her chest, her fingers twitching against the hem of her sleeves. She knew there was no escape now. "What do you want, Claire?" Megan asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. Claire took a step closer, her smirk widening. "I've been thinking, Megan. You've really overstayed your welcome at Crestwood. You're like a stain no one can wash out. It's starting to get embarrassing." Megan swallowed hard. "I haven't done anything to you." "Haven't done anything?" Claire echoed mockingly, her voice rising as if Megan had said something absurd. "You ruined everything the moment you stepped into my world. You humiliated me, Megan. Twice. First at the dance, and now Tyler Scott? Tyler freaking Scott." The mention of Tyler's name made Megan flinch. "This isn't about Tyler." Claire's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Oh, but it is. You think you can just stand next to him like you belong there? You think you can take him from me? I didn't take anything from you." Megan's voice cracked, her frustration slipping through. "Tyler's his own person. He makes his own choices." Claire's laugh was cold, sharp enough to slice through the air. "No, Megan. You're the one who doesn't get it. People like Tyler don't belong with people like you. He's a star, and you? You're nothing." Megan's jaw clenched, tears stinging at the edges of her eyes. "You don't get to decide that." Claire tilted her head, studying Megan as though she were some peculiar insect. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" Her voice dropped into something colder, more venomous. "You're pathetic, Megan. And I'm going to prove it." Before Megan could react, Jessica lunged forward, shoving her hard. Megan stumbled, catching herself just before hitting the ground. She spun around to face them, panic bubbling in her chest. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice shaking. "What's wrong with you?" Claire stepped closer, her face twisted in a mixture of amusement and cruelty. "You need to learn where you stand." Jessica shoved her again, harder this time. Megan fell to the pavement, the rough ground scraping her palms as her backpack spilled open. Books and papers scattered across the alley, but she barely registered them. "Get up, Megan," Claire taunted, standing over her. "Show me how tough you are." Megan pushed herself onto her knees, her breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," Claire replied, her voice cold and empty. Suddenly, a voice boomed from behind them. "Hey!" The group froze. The unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the alley, growing louder with every beat of Megan's pounding heart. She looked up just as Tyler Scott burst onto the scene, his face contorted with fury. His broad frame loomed in the dim light, and for the first time, Claire and her friends seemed to hesitate. "What the hell is this?" Tyler growled, his dark eyes fixed on Claire. Claire recovered quickly, flipping her hair back with a fake smile. "Relax, Tyler. We're just having a little chat. Tyler's gaze swept over Megan, taking in her scraped hands, her spilled belongings, and the tears threatening to fall. His jaw clenched as he turned back to Claire. This ends now. Or what? Claire challenged, crossing her arms. You'll hit me? Go ahead, Tyler. Show everyone who you really are. I don't need to lay a hand on you to make you regret this, Tyler shot back, his voice low and dangerous. Jessica shifted nervously, and Brooke muttered something under her breath. Claire held her ground, but her confidence was clearly fraying. Tyler ignored them, moving to Megan's side. He crouched beside her, his expression softening as he gently touched her shoulder. You okay? Megan nodded faintly, though her voice wouldn't come. Tyler stood, turning to face the group. If I ever see any of you near her again, you're going to wish you hadn't. Claire's expression hardened. You think you can protect her forever? Tyler's gaze didn't waver. Watch me. Claire's smirk faltered for just a moment before she snapped her fingers. Let's go. The girls turned and walked away, their heels clicking against the pavement. Claire lingered for a second longer, her gaze lingering on Megan. This isn't over. When they finally disappeared around the corner, Tyler let out a breath and crouched beside Megan again, gathering her scattered belongings. Can you stand? Megan nodded weakly, letting him pull her to her feet. Her knees wobbled, but Tyler's steady hands kept her upright. You shouldn't have come here alone, he said, his voice low but filled with concern. I thought I could fix it, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tyler shook his head, his brow furrowing. Some people don't want to be fixed, Megan. You can't reason with someone like Claire. Megan's shoulders slumped, the weight of everything crashing down on her. I'm so tired, Tyler. I can't keep doing this. Tyler's grip on her tightened, his expression pained. Don't say that. You're stronger than this. You're stronger than them. She looked up at him, tears spilling over. You deserve someone who doesn't bring all this chaos into your life. Tyler froze, his face etched with disbelief. What are you talking about? I'm saying, you should stay away from me, Megan said, her voice breaking. I'm not worth this, Tyler. I'm not worth getting hurt. Tyler grabbed her shoulders gently but firmly, forcing her to look at him. Stop. Don't you dare say that. I'm here because I want to be. You're worth everything, Megan. She shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. I can't, Tyler. I just can't. Before he could stop her, she pulled away, turning and walking out of the alley, leaving Tyler standing alone in the darkness. The sound of knuckles striking a heavy bag echoed through the small, gritty gym, followed by a grunt and the faint creak of old leather. Megan Foster wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her glove, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her punches were wild at first, unfocused and driven purely by emotion, but now they were deliberate, each one snapping the bag back on its chain. Again. Mike's gravelly voice barked from across the room, sharp and unrelenting. Megan didn't argue. She pivoted her stance and drove her right fist into the bag, her entire body behind the motion. Pain flared through her knuckles, but she welcomed it, let it feed her resolve. The memories swarmed her mind like hornets. Claire's laughter, her father's harsh words, Tyler's bruised face staring at her in that alley. Her muscles ached, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Better, Mike said, walking up behind her. He was a gruff man in his late 50s, with silver hair cropped close to his head and arms like steel cables. His years in the ring had carved deep lines into his face, and his eyes held the kind of wisdom that came only from life knocking you down and daring you to get back up. But you're still holding back. Megan turned to him, panting. I'm not. Mike crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. You think I can't see it? You're pulling punches. There's still fear in you. Her fists tightened at her sides. I'm not afraid. Yeah. Then why do you flinch every time you hit the bag hard enough to hurt? Mike stepped closer, his voice quieter now but no less intense. Listen to me, kid. Strength isn't just about your fists. It's in here. He tapped his chest. In here. He pointed to her head. You want to stop feeling weak. Then stop lying to yourself about what's holding you back. Megan looked away, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. She wanted to yell at him, to tell him he didn't understand, but she couldn't. Because Mike did understand. He could see right through her. The truth was, Megan didn't know what she was fighting anymore. Was it Claire? The endless whispers of humiliation? Or was it the guilt of walking away from Tyler when he had refused to give up on her? Her thoughts spiraled until Mike's voice snapped her back. Again. She turned to the bag, her knuckles throbbing with every punch she'd already thrown. Her body screamed for rest, but Megan blocked out the pain, channeling it into her movements. Each strike became sharper, each motion stronger. She imagined Claire's smirk, her father's dismissive stare, and Tyler's disappointed eyes. The anger churned inside her like a storm. Harder! Mike shouted. She punched again, her muscles burning. Harder! Another punch. Harder! With a guttural scream, Megan twisted her hips and threw a devastating right hook. The heavy bag swung violently on its chain, a loud thud reverberating through the gym. Her breathing was ragged, her arms trembling, but something had shifted. The weight that had been crushing her chest for so long felt a little lighter. Mike nodded approvingly. Now we're getting somewhere. Weeks passed, and Megan's routine became a steady rhythm. School, gym, study, repeat. She kept to herself, slipping through the hallways of Crestwood High like a shadow. Claire's taunts had slowed, but Megan didn't care anymore. She no longer looked for their approval, nor did she cower under their stares. She found solace in the gym, where Mike pushed her harder with every session. The punching bag was no longer her only opponent. Now she sparred with others, men and women who didn't care about her past, her reputation, or the cruelty she'd faced. In the ring, all that mattered was her strength, her focus, and her will to keep standing. Mike often repeated his mantra like a drumbeat in her mind. You're only as strong as you believe you are. It wasn't just her body that changed. The girl who once cried on the cold, wet gym floor was gone. Megan walked taller now, her steps purposeful. She didn't hide behind baggy clothes or look away when people whispered. She didn't even notice the stares of others anymore. They had become background noise. One afternoon, after a grueling session, Megan sat on the gym bench unwrapping her hands. Her skin was red and raw beneath the tape, but she didn't mind. The pain was proof that she'd earned something today. Mike dropped a water bottle beside her and sat on the bench across from her, studying her in silence. Finally, he spoke. You're not the same girl who walked through that door weeks ago. Megan looked up, her expression calm. I don't want to be her anymore. Mike nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Good. But let me ask you something. What are you really fighting for? The question hit harder than any punch she'd ever taken. Megan opened her mouth, then closed it again. For weeks, she had buried herself in training, letting the gym become her refuge. But she hadn't allowed herself to think about the answer. Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You can train forever, kid. You can get stronger, faster, tougher. But if you don't figure out why you're fighting, you'll always feel lost. Megan stared at him, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. That night, as Megan sat at her small desk, her phone buzzed. She ignored it at first, focusing on the psychology textbook in front of her, but when it buzzed again, she reluctantly checked the screen. The notification was for a video. A familiar name made her heart stop. Tyler Scott. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. On the screen, Tyler stood on a football field, surrounded by rows of young athletes. His voice was steady, his words carrying over the noise of the crowd. Sometimes, you meet someone who changes the way you see the world, Tyler said, his eyes looking directly into the camera. Someone who shows you that strength isn't just about winning, it's about getting up when you've been knocked down. And no matter how far you fall, you can always get back up. The camera zoomed in on him, and for a moment, Megan swore he was looking straight at her. Her throat tightened as tears pricked her eyes. She had spent weeks pushing him away, convincing herself that she was doing him a favor. But the truth was, she had been running from him, running from the past, and running from herself. She closed her laptop and stared at the wall, Mike's words echoing in her mind. What are you really fighting for? For the first time in weeks, Megan knew the answer. She was fighting for herself, yes, but she was also fighting for the chance to stand beside the person who had never given up on her. The next morning, Megan bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. It was time to stop running. The sun was merciless in Los Angeles, its golden rays spilling over the city like molten fire. Megan Foster stepped out of the cab, squinting at the sprawling stadium in front of her. It loomed like a fortress, alive with the sounds of whistles, shouts, and running feet echoing through the air. She clutched her small bag tighter against her shoulder, her heart pounding with every step she took toward the entrance. It had been months since she'd seen Tyler Scott. Months since that night in the alley when she'd walked away from him, convinced she was doing the right thing. Now, standing in the shadow of his world, her stomach churned. This was Tyler's place, bright, loud, and full of energy. She felt out of place, like an uninvited guest trespassing into his life. The guard at the entrance barely glanced at her as she passed through the gate. Inside, the stadium was a maze of activity. Young athletes sprinting drills, coaches barking instructions, and parents watching proudly from the bleachers. Megan scanned the field, her gaze flitting across the dozens of faces. Then she saw him. Tyler stood near the 50-yard line, a whistle hanging around his neck as he shouted directions to a group of teenagers in helmets and jerseys. His black t-shirt was soaked with sweat, his dark hair tousled, and yet he looked completely in his element, strong, confident, alive. Megan froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times on the flight over, but now every carefully crafted word slipped from her mind. She was terrified. What if he didn't want to see her? What if walking away had been the last straw? Tyler blew his whistle, bringing the drill to an end. As he turned to hand the clipboard to an assistant coach, his gaze lifted toward the stands. For a split second, his eyes passed over Megan, then snapped back to her. He froze. Megan's breath hitched as their gazes locked. Tyler's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The sounds of the stadium faded into nothing, the crowd, the whistles, the drills, it all blurred around them. Finally, Tyler handed the clipboard off and began walking toward her. Megan felt rooted to the spot, her heart racing faster with each step he took. The space between them felt both too small and endless, until Tyler stopped a few feet away. Megan. His voice was soft, unsure, like he didn't trust himself to believe what he was seeing. "Hi," she said, her voice barely audible. Tyler stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "What are you doing here?" Megan swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the dozens of people watching from the field and stands. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "I needed to see you. I needed to stop running." Tyler blinked, clearly caught off guard. "You ran because you thought you were protecting me," he said quietly, a hint of sadness in his voice. "But you weren't. You were protecting yourself." The truth of his words stung, but Megan didn't look away. "I know. I was scared, Tyler. I was scared of ruining your life, scared of letting you down, scared of you seeing me for what I thought I was." "And what was that?" he asked softly. "Broken." Tyler's expression shifted, a flicker of pain crossing his face before he stepped closer. "You were never broken, Megan. You were hurt. There's a difference." She felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she fought them back. "I didn't come here to make excuses. I came because I finally realized something. I've spent so much time fighting to prove myself to everyone, to Claire, to my dad, to the world. I didn't stop to think about what I wanted. And what I want," her voice broke, "what I want is a chance to make this right." Tyler stared at her for what felt like an eternity. The tension in the air was suffocating, every moment dragging as Megan waited for him to say something, anything. Finally, Tyler exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as he took another step forward. "Why now?" Megan hesitated, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Because I'm not scared anymore. And because you were right. You told me I was worth fighting for. And I finally believe it." The corner of Tyler's mouth lifted into the faintest of smiles. "You always were." Megan let out a shaky breath, tears spilling over as relief washed through her. Tyler reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. For the first time in months, Megan felt steady, like the ground beneath her feet was finally solid. "You walked away, Meg," Tyler said, his voice low. "But you came back. And I'm not walking away again," she promised. Tyler smiled fully now, a real smile that made his entire face light up. Good. The stadium had emptied by sunset, the once loud space now quiet and still. Megan and Tyler sat together on the edge of the bleachers, their legs dangling as they watched the golden light bleed into the horizon. "So, what now?" Tyler asked, glancing at her. Megan smiled faintly, her fingers brushing against his. "I don't know. I think that's the best part." Tyler's brow lifted, a teasing grin tugging at his lips. "No plan. That doesn't sound like you." "People change," she replied softly, her gaze fixed on the sun sinking into the distant hills. Tyler tilted his head, watching her. "You did change. You're stronger now. I can see it." Megan looked at him, her heart swelling at the way he spoke, like he had always believed she was strong, even when she hadn't. "I think I had to lose everything for a while," she admitted. "But I found myself in the process." Tyler nodded slowly. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're fighting back." Megan smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am." They sat in silence for a while, the warmth of Tyler's hand resting against hers. Finally, Tyler stood, holding out his other hand. "Come on." Megan blinked up at him. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." She let him pull her to her feet, following him down to the field where the empty grass stretched wide and golden. Tyler grabbed his phone from his pocket and scrolled through something before pressing play. Music spilled through the quiet, a soft, familiar melody that made Megan stop in her tracks. Her eyes widened. "Is this the same song?" Tyler said, smiling. "From the dance." Megan laughed, the sound surprising even her. "You kept it. I don't let go of things that matter." Tyler stepped closer, offering his hand. "Dance with me." Megan's breath caught, the moment stretching between them. Finally, she took his hand, letting him pull her close. They swayed slowly on the empty field, the music drifting around them as the sky darkened to twilight. Megan rested her head against his chest, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, like the fight was finally over. Tyler's voice broke through the quiet, soft and certain. "We made it, Meg." She smiled, her fingers curling around his. "Yeah, we did." And as they danced under the fading light, the rest of the world disappeared. For now, it was just the two of them. No scars, no whispers, no battles left to fight. Just a future they were ready to face together. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications.